Jyotirgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Mageti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we'll have these three talks on the past and present of these three founding lights of the Ramakrishna movement. So today we'll see a few ideas connected with Sri Ramakrishna and his past and present. So what do I really mean by past and present? It's a question that was asked in the Vedas. The words were Kasmai Devaya Havisha Vidhema. Who is this deity? Who is this divine being to whom we offer worship? So when we do the evening arati and the beautiful hymns that we sang, many of them were composed by Swami Vivekananda himself. So when we sing the arati, when we offer worship to Sri Ramakrishna, who is the one who is receiving it? Which Ramakrishna? So how many Ramakrishnas have there been? One obvious answer to that is Ramakrishna is one who was born in Kamarpukur in the year 1836. He lived for about 50 years, passing away in 1886. And many of you, I imagine most of you, have read his life and know some of the important landmarks of his life. And what his life represents resonates with our head and heart to a lesser or a greater degree. And that's what makes us want to know more about him. So there is the Ramakrishna of history. In India, many history books, there is a mention of Ramakrishna. And Ramakrishna of the history is Ramakrishna who lived from 1836 to 1886. But as a person of history, Ramakrishna is bound in time, 50 years, separated from us, with a long, not as much separated from us as the way Krishna and Rama are. But nevertheless, even if it is a little over 130 years after his passing, but still that's quite something. That's quite a gap. And if you are living somewhere in Kamarpukur, then the spatial distance may not have been much, but now from Pittsburgh to Kamarpukur is quite some distance. So we are separated from him in space, separated from him from time. And so what can the Ramakrishna of history do to us? But we know that Ramakrishna lives in some way even today. There is one Ramakrishna who passed away. We don't have the physical presence. Even if you go to Dakshineshwar today, you get to see his room, you get to see the temple at which he worshipped, but you don't get to see him. Sri Ramakrishna had that experience. When he went to Vrindavan, that was one of the few pilgrimages that he himself undertook. And we read in his life that as he saw those different sites connected with Krishna's Leela, Sri Ramakrishna said, all these places are there, but Krishna, where are you? I don't get to see you. And that is the experience of Ramakrishna devotees as well. Go to Kamarpukur, there are places to see, that Pathshala, that school at which he studied, whatever is left of that mango orchard here today, then that cremation ground where he used to go and meditate. And we get some general idea, although the place is developing slowly, we get some idea of how that village may have been at the time of Ramakrishna. With a little bit of imagination, we get some idea. But we don't get to see him because Ramakrishna history is gone. But we know about him. None of us has met him physically, yet we know about him through books. So to know Sri Ramakrishna of history, we need books. And when you read a book about someone or by someone, and if you like that book, you want to meet that person. I remember years ago, probably sometime in early 90s, one book was recommended to me by a Swami of our order. Some of you may have heard about it or read it. It was called The Miracle of Mindfulness. It is by a Vietnamese Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh. And so I read that book. And I liked it very much. I liked it so much that I was hoping, oh, how wonderful it will be to be able to meet that person who wrote that book. And as it turned out, after about, I guess, 5 or 6 years after I had read that book, I got the news that that author of that book, Thich Nhat Hanh, that Vietnamese monk, he was in fact visiting Chennai, which is where I was at that time. And he was going to give a retreat. There is a Theosophical Society there in Adyar, and that's where he was going to give a retreat. And because I was in Chennai, I thought, oh, this will be a nice opportunity to go and see him. And I went and saw him. One of the things that I could share with you is there was a little bit of an apprehension when I went to see him. And the apprehension was that I had liked that book so much, and I had formed certain idea about who the author might be. And sometimes, sight unseen, you kind of form ideas about someone, and then when you actually meet that person, and that person appears to be so different from what you had imagined, then it's not such a good feeling. So that was the apprehension, that I love this book so much, and maybe when I actually see him, and somehow it just doesn't strike a chord, then that I might not like the book anymore. And as it turned out, actually when I did see him, it was wonderful. It's truly a very nice experience. In fact, after meeting him, he invited me over to, although I had not registered for that retreat, I had my duties at the center in Chennai, so obviously I couldn't attend those. It was probably a 5-day retreat. And it was pretty expensive, I think. By Indian standards, I think it was something like 5,000 rupees of 20 years ago, so it was quite expensive. And there was no way. So I didn't even know whether I would be allowed to go because I wasn't registered. In fact, at that gate itself, at the main gate to the Theosophical Society, they were all checking whether people had any the registration, whatever, form or something, the acknowledgement, whether they were registered or not. Luckily, I was in these robes, and in India, this works as a universal license for everything. So they didn't dare to ask me whether I could just go. But nevertheless, I did not step inside the hall because I knew I wasn't a delegate, so I didn't want to just gate crash like that. So I stood outside, and then he came. And then it was wonderful. So and then he bowed the way the Buddhists do. And I just told him very briefly that I had read his book, I liked it very much, and I just wanted to see him. And he was very gracious. He invited me inside. And so every morning he would give a talk as the retreat began. And those, they call it the Dharma talk. And so he invited me over he said, you're welcome to 10. And I said, I'm not registered. He said, doesn't matter, you come as my guest. So I was able to attend those Dharma talks for a few more. I just attended that main talk. I couldn't stay for the whole day. And then the last day of that retreat, he invited me over for lunch. So that was supposed to be a very traditional, well, as much as traditional you can make it. So they wanted to kind of recreate how the Buddhist monks used to do bhiksha and then have that bhiksha food. So they invited me over and said, you can join us for that big ceremony, that very ceremonial lunch. And so then, besides me, there were, of course, he had his big group of Vietnamese monks with him, and there were a few Tibetan monks were there. I think 1 or 2 Chinese were there, and they were all Buddhist, and I was the only Hindu monk there. And so for that lunch they said, everybody bring your own bhiksha bowls, begging bowls. And I told her, I said, we don't carry any begging bowls. And they said, no, don't worry, we will supply you one. And so apparently, at the time of the Buddha's time, they would all go in a line for begging. And it was according to seniority. So obviously the Buddha was the most senior during Buddha's time. So he would be leading the thing. And then according to the seniority, they would go. What I really appreciated in that was that they wanted to know which year I was ordained. And as it turned out, most of the monks who were with him were very, very young. And so I was the 3rd senior most in that hall. What was wonderful was that what I truly appreciated was that they did not make any distinction whether I'm from a different tradition, I'm from a different distinct, but they just said, as monks, we are all same. So they didn't make any. So that was nice. And so we had to carry the bowl, and then we had a ceremony. So this is really not a part of today's topic, but now that I'm narrating to you what happened, I thought, let me give you a few details. And years later then, I saw a video had been published of Thich Nhat Hanh's that tour of India. I think it was 1997 or 1996. And so in that tour, this ceremonial lunch was there, and so I was part of that whole video. A later discovery was done. Anyway, so why I mentioned this, there's one more little incident I can mention about that was, so while we were going to that place where the procession was to start, he was this very young Vietnamese monk. He was probably maybe just 20 or 21 years old. And so as he and I were walking together, and then he just looks at me, and then he asks me, he says, can I just touch you? And I said, yeah, of course. And then he just kind of touched me and said, you are the first Indian monk I ever touched. And anyways, it was very innocent, very, 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 it was a very good experience. But I just mentioned this to show that after reading that book, I felt like meeting him. Now, luckily for me, because he happened to be where I was living, that space separating for time was gone, because he was already still living when I was, and the distance from space was removed because he was visiting the same place as I was. Now, if we have to meet Ramakrishna after reading his book, how do we bridge this gap? He's separated from time. There's no way we can reduce that, as it at least appears now. He's separated from space. So the Ramakrishna of the past, Ramakrishna of history, has gone. We can never meet him. Luckily for us, we yet feel that he is still there with us. So who is this Ramakrishna who is with us? He is not the Ramakrishna of history, because he's gone. So in one way, Ramakrishna becomes real to us is through a different kind of presence, not the physical presence. So when we read the Gospel of Ramakrishna, when we read his life, when we read about his conversations, how should we read it? One way of reading about Ramakrishna is, well, here is this book about someone, a great person, and if you believe him in an avatar, it's an incarnation, but he lived more than 100 years ago. So you can read his books as a person of history. You can, when you read the Gospel, you can see, oh, this is what Ramakrishna told those people at that time, which is good, which can be helpful, but yet we are still separated from that story. Now, if we want to bring Ramakrishna of the past to Ramakrishna of the present, we need to somehow insert ourselves into that story. So when we read, for instance, Ramakrishna is sitting in this room in Dakshineshwar, in that little bed, and then sometimes the names are mentioned in the book. There is Bhavanath, Paltu, Narendranath, Rakhal, and so on. They are all sitting. As we read this, can we, if we have a little bit of a creative imagination, we can say, well, I am sitting there along with them. So if Ramakrishna of the past cannot come to us now, we can go, at least mentally, to that time. We can see ourselves sitting there. This is not a new idea. Though some of you may have seen, and I noticed this first when I was visiting Italy, and some of those old churches, and many of these great paintings there, all of these big paintings that we see done by great artists, and most of the artists were very poor, and to do even, you may have the art, but to do all this painting, you still need some financial support. From where are you going to get the color and the canvas and all of that? So all of these great artists, they had some patrons or someone who commissioned the paintings. And they were usually wealthy people who had money, who had appreciation of the art, but who didn't have the skill to draw. But they then paid these artists and say, okay, draw this. And many of the big paintings in the churches there, in Rome and Florence and other places, are oftentimes incidents from the life of Jesus. Then great art, great paintings. Now, if you have a guided tour, because sometimes when we just kind of go and see them as tourists, then we can enjoy it, it's nice. But if you have someone, an expert in that field, trying to explain to you, then we get to know many more details than what we would have otherwise known. And so I had a guide to show me, and then what was interesting was the guide was giving some of the details which might have escaped our attention otherwise. And that was some of these big paintings. So obviously a painting from Jesus' life, we can identify who Jesus is. Maybe we can identify Mary and some of those prominent parts of people who are around him. But oftentimes the guide would point out in that crowd one person who was actually the donor of that painting. So oftentimes the either expressed or unexpressed condition or tradition was, whoever is paying for that painting, the painter would then somehow insert that person in that. So at least in picture, the donor has satisfaction. Oh, I was there, at least in this idea, when Jesus gave those teachings. So when we read now Ramakrishna's conversations, rather than reading about, oh, this is what Ramakrishna told Narendra, or Ramakrishna told a group of devotees, can I insert myself into that room in Dakshineshwar? And if you have been to Dakshineshwar or seen photographs of that place, then it becomes a little bit more easier to kind of put yourself somewhere. And then, when we read Ramakrishna's words, rather than seeing them as something that he told someone else, I can say, well, I'm now sitting in that room. And everything that he's saying it to me. Now, when you read the Gospel of Ramakrishna, and you read Ramakrishna's words, with the awareness that this is what he's telling me, it makes a big difference. Because then it's no more a Ramakrishna of history. Then Ramakrishna has become very personal there. Because then we are able to relate his words directly to us. That is how Ramakrishna of the past then can come in the present. That is how a person of history can become more real to me. That's one important thing to remember. So we see the living presence of Ramakrishna even before we may have had any mystical experience about him, through the lives of people who have been inspired by him. In fact, Swami Vivekananda said that this whole the Ramakrishna Mutt and the Ramakrishna Mission and all the centers that have sprung up in different parts of the world everywhere, Swamiji said that this is the visible body of Ramakrishna. So today, Ramakrishna lives through all these great centers that have sprung up. In his words, his life, his form, his name is bringing inspiration to devotees and sincere seekers of God everywhere. So that is how then Ramakrishna of the past become the Ramakrishna of the present. And when we see the lives of people being transformed, our own life being transformed, then we know that the power that Ramakrishna was and is a living power. So the Ramakrishna of history educates us. Ramakrishna of the present inspires us. Because when we see someone whose life is changed for the better, someone who becomes a role model, then we want to know how did that person become that way? That's why sometimes when, suppose someone is celebrating their 100th birthday, now it's not very common for everyone to live up to 100. We all would love to do that. But suppose there is a person and let's say at that age of 100, this person is in the best of health. So what kind of questions would a reporter or a journalist who is going to interview that person ask? And one would be, what is the secret of your health? What do you eat? What kind of exercise do you take? How have you managed to maintain such good health? We are curious, right? So similarly, we see someone who is very peaceful, very calm, very contented. Then anyone would be like, oh, I get so agitated, I'm so upset. And this person I see is always happy, always peaceful. What is it that this person does? And then maybe you go on make friendship with that person, and then you come to know, oh, this person is derived his inspiration from someone called Ramakrishna. And then you say, oh, is that so? Then, well, what book do you recommend? And so that's how then a lot of the way Ramakrishna has become known, his name has spread in the world, not so much through advertisements. In fact, right from the beginning, the Ramakrishna mission has been very notorious for not being very aggressive in selling them. It has always been very low key, but yet it has spread everywhere through a living example of people, monks and devotees, sincere seekers of God. And then just by looking at them, more and more people come to know. Even within the family, you would have seen it's not always that everyone in the family, let's say, is devoted to Ramakrishna. But the beauty is this: oftentimes, even if there is just one person, and you don't have to try to aggressively push Ramakrishna on other people. If Ramakrishna inspires you, just see what is it that, and try to live according to the way Ramakrishna taught. That will help us, and to the extent we are able to transform our own lives, those in the immediate circle around us, whether it's our family, friends, that is a more powerful way to preach than through words. Preaching through words is a very indirect way. As Swami Vivekananda actually explains it in one of his lectures. We might think, well, not directly hearing someone, this seems to be a very direct process of learning. It's not really that as direct as we think. Because when you listen to a talk or a lecture, for instance, like what's happening now, it's not as direct as it is. For instance, now, when a speaker speaks, there are certain ideas in the speaker's mind. Those ideas have to be put into words in the speaker's mind. Those words need to be uttered. When those words are uttered, the sound is produced. Then those sound waves enter into your ears. Then that sound has to be again interpreted by your brain. And because if you know that language in which the sounds have come, then the sound again becomes words, the words become ideas, and then you know what is being said. Right now it just takes much longer for me to describe it. It seems very direct, but it's not so direct. It's thoughts, then words, the sound, then resolving back then into words and sounds. The direct would be, no words are necessary. Shankaracharya describes that in his Dakshinamurti Stotra, when he says, Kurostu maunam vyakhyanam shishyastu chinna samshayaha. That the greatest talk, the greatest lecture is silence. And the direct knowledge that the teacher can transfer to a student without the need for words, with that the doubts in the minds of the student are dispelled. Now that's a very high form of teaching. No words are needed. For that both the teacher as well as the student have to be ready. The Upanishad says, Ascharyo vakta kushalosya labdha. The teacher has to be wonderful, the student has to be wonderful. Then there is the best transference of knowledge. In modern education, sometimes I don't know who exactly said this, could be Bernard Shaw or could be someone else, it doesn't matter. They said that this modern education is that mysterious process by which knowledge is transferred from the notes from the professor's book onto the notebook of the student without passing through the head of either of them. So the direct knowledge is no words are necessary. Nevertheless, the power of life is very important, and this is important for all elders in a family, parents, grandparents, teachers. Because sometimes we think that, oh, this younger generation, they don't listen to us, they don't care for us. And this is not to say that verbal advice is not helpful. It does help, but it becomes powerful only when it is backed up by our own life. And therefore, the Ramakrishna of the past can be brought into the present through trying to live. So we read his books, understand what he says, and then try to practice it in our own life. Now, one important thing to be remembered, two actually, well, there are several, but let me see as they come to my mind. One is that not everything that Sri Ramakrishna said has to be relevant to us. We know that people of different age groups, people with different requirements came to him, and he taught all of them. So it's not necessary that every word that he spoke should be relevant to me. So if you read something from Sri Ramakrishna, and some things will immediately strike and say, oh yes, this makes sense. And some things will kind of maybe even leave you cold. It's like, okay, but it's not very relevant to you, which is all right. Everything doesn't have to be relevant. But what's important to remember is that even if something is not relevant now, it doesn't mean it will not be relevant 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes there is some situation in life, and suddenly you find a way to do it. And then it's, oh, many years ago I had read somewhere, and now I know what it means. So something which may not be relevant or which may not be clear at this moment might become relevant at some other time. So the first thing is, not everything has to be relevant now. The second thing is, not every question needs an immediate answer. Today we live in the age of Google, in which it seems relatively easy to find answers to questions. You just have to, if you've got a good search engine and a good online access, then it seems like there is nothing you do not know. And yet, answers which are gotten very easily are also very easily forgotten. If you have not, and some of the older generation will recognize it. Earlier, when you had to find some reference, you kind of go to the library, find out that book, turn. Sometimes the index will not be sufficient. You have to kind of keep on turning the pages and then find it. And if you have taken some trouble to find that answer, then it sticks with you for a longer time. So that is the second thing. That is, we may have lots of questions in spiritual life. All of them have answers, but it's not necessary that I should have answers to all of them at this moment. Even if I was given all those answers, either I would not remember them or would not understand them. Thirdly, even if I get these answers, don't cling to those answers too tightly. Hold them a little bit lightly, because answers will, just as questions will evolve, answers will also evolve. And so, if and when we find a better answer, we should have the courage to let go of the earlier answers. That's what learning means. Learning doesn't simply mean going from not knowing to knowing, or sometimes we might say from error to truth. Swamiji said it's from lesser truth to a higher truth. So hold everything that we know, hold it as a provisional understanding. Because as we grow and evolve, our understanding will improve and our answers will also improve. So the trick really is not so much finding an answer, but acquiring the ability to ask the right question. The Pandit under whom I studied when I was in Chennai is a very traditional Vedic scholar, and one of the best teachers I have met in my life. And so he was, whenever we used to ask him questions, and he had never gone to school, He had studied in this Vedic Pathsala from his childhood. And so his mother tongue was Tamil, so he's a Tamilian, and he knows Sanskrit. He could speak Sanskrit probably more fluently than his mother tongue. But he didn't know a word in English. And I didn't know a word in Tamil, and my knowledge of Sanskrit was very rudimentary. But that was the only mode of communication we had. And so I was lucky to have studied 12 years under him, and so I had to ask, even if I had a question, I would have to ask it in Sanskrit. But I had studied Sanskrit in school, so it wasn't that difficult. And after 3 or 6 months, I was able to speak Sanskrit fairly correctly. In any case, whenever I would ask him a question, he would not answer that question. He would first correct the question. Not just grammatically. I'm not talking about grammatical correction. So what he would say when you are studying a passage, I'd ask a question, and then he would say, well, a better question here would be this, not the one you are asking. So, and the beauty was this: when you refine your question, when you ask the correct question and keep on refining that question, oftentimes the answer is embedded in the question itself. So it's not so much about finding answers, it's about finding a way to rephrase your question, going on refining that question more and more until you will find the answer right there. And so that is the way, therefore, the Ramakrishna of the past can become present, that we insert ourselves into his story. Whatever he says to the people 100 years ago, I have to tell myself this is what he's telling me. And then whatever it is that seems relevant to me at the present stage of my life, I must somehow put it into practice. As Swami Vivekananda said, an ounce of theory is worth thousands of tons of practice. An ounce of practice. An ounce of practice is worth thousands of tons of theory. So if we can practice even a little bit, that is worth much more than reading just a library full of books. In fact, reading too many books is not a good idea. It makes us parrots. We can then, maybe if you read too many books, you can impress a lot of people, kind of make them feel you know such a lot of things, but that doesn't give any indication of where we are in spiritual life. So that is then Ramakrishna of the past bringing him to the present. So the present Ramakrishna we see through his power that is manifesting through these different centers, through the lives of people and so on. But we need to bring Ramakrishna still closer to us. Ramakrishna of the present can inspire us. Ramakrishna of the past can educate us. But Ramakrishna has to come still closer. Ramakrishna has to enter into our heart in order for that Ramakrishna to change our life, to make it better. It's just like a refining process. So the Ramakrishna, when Ramakrishna of the present enters into my heart, then the separation that we experience, the separation from space and separation in time, is completely eliminated in the heart. So those of us who meditate on Ramakrishna as our Ishta, the Ramakrishna that we see in our heart is not the Ramakrishna of history. The Ramakrishna of history lived in Dakshineshwar and Kamarpukur. He is not in my heart. He is not just the power that we see manifest in society. Ramakrishna of the heart is the real living Ramakrishna, who is living now, this very moment, and in this very place, not separated from me by even a millimeter. I think in the Quran there is something to the effect that the Lord, Allah is closer to you than your jugular vein. Is that how it's pronounced? Apparently, jugular? Jugular? How do you pronounce it? Jugular? Jugular vein, yeah. So apparently isn't it somewhere here or what? Somewhere there, yeah. So the idea is again, so that is like our whole, apparently that's if it's cut or missing, the life can go, right? So my very existence is very connected with that. And there is nothing that is closest to my being than the jugular vein, according to the Quran. That is the way it's been expressed there. And he said, Allah is closer to me even than that. So that's what is meant by God becoming not just from the past to the present, but just in the right now, in this present moment itself. And so here is this thing, when we pray to Ramakrishna, when we pray and we meditate on Ramakrishna, who are we meditating on? Now, many of us are fortunate that unlike some of these earlier deities, who are also very real, but oftentimes we have had to depend on the descriptions found in hymns and songs written by people who actually had the visions of those deities in order for us to figure out how Krishna may have looked, how Rama may have looked, how Shiva looks, and so on. But Sri Ramakrishna's case, we have an advantage because he is, in terms of time, very close to us. And thanks to photography, we have his pictures. So it becomes a little bit easier to visualize and imagine how Ramakrishna looked. And we need that kind of help. Now, depending on whoever our Ishta is, we have to visualize the form of the Ishta. Oftentimes when those who were, say, meditate on Krishna or Rama, and maybe perhaps they have seen some picture of Krishna or Rama or some murti somewhere, which immediately resonates with them. So when they try to visualize, that becomes a help. So in Ramakrishna's case, we have his photograph itself. That becomes a help. But there is one very important point to remember, and that is a picture of Ramakrishna or a murti of Ramakrishna with which we feel a sense of connection can help us visualize Ramakrishna in the heart. But when we visualize him, we should not visualize the murti or visualize the photograph. We have to visualize the living Ramakrishna. Because by that I mean, we are not meditating on a picture. We are not meditating on an image. We are meditating on the real Ramakrishna in the heart. The two are different. It's like the picture of a mango is different from a real mango. The picture of a mango can remind me of a mango. But if you want to eat mango, then you can't eat the picture. You need a real mango. So a photograph of Ramakrishna or an image of Ramakrishna can remind me, can help me think of the real Ramakrishna. But the one who will liberate me, the one who will remove ignorance from my heart, the one who will give me moksha is not the picture, is not the image, is this living Ramakrishna, of whom the picture and the image are aids, are helpful for us to see it. There is no doubt that a special power does get manifested through that picture, through that murti. In fact, I think in the Ramanuja tradition, they speak about the Archavatara, even through the murti, through that a special power comes. That is true. Once someone asked that question to Holy Mother, that when we pray to Ramakrishna in a photograph or in an image, is he really there, or do we have to just be a little imaginative and just kind of imagine him in there? And what Mother said was, she said, Chaya Kaya Saman, She said that the Ramakrishna and his representation are one and the same. And then she adds this, that if you regularly stand or sit before the picture of Ramakrishna and pray there with faith and devotion and prayer, then Ramakrishna manifests himself in a special way through that picture or through that image. So it's true that a special power does get manifest through it. Even then, when we are meditating or praying, don't think of the picture, don't think of the murti. Think of Ramakrishna as Ramakrishna was, the way you would have seen him if you were sitting there in his room in Dakshineshwar. See him as filled with light in that Arati hymn which you sing every evening. Swamiji refers to Ramakrishna as Chit Ghana Kai. Chit is consciousness. Ghana is concentrated. Kaya is the body. So he says the body of Ramakrishna is pure consciousness concentrated. We know one of the Mahavakyas, the Vedas, says Prajnanam Brahma. Brahman is pure consciousness. So that infinite reality, in fact the only reality, is pure consciousness. Now, that is who we are too, but it's difficult for us in our present state of evolution to see consciousness as it is. And therefore, for our sake, that which is infinite apparently becomes finite. That which is very subtler than the subtlest apparently becomes more tangible. And that happens through the Chit Ghana Kai. If that infinite consciousness were to take a form, if it were to be concentrated, then that would take the form of Ramakrishna. That's how a devotee of Ramakrishna sees. Not that he is different from that infinite consciousness, but that same infinite consciousness had become tangible for my benefit. When we make an effort to see that real Ramakrishna in our heart during prayer, during meditation, during puja, a time comes when what in the beginning might seem to be a creative imagination is no longer imagination, it becomes very real. So there are two kinds of imaginations. One is imagining the imaginary, and second is imagining the real. Now, no matter, you can imagine the imaginary for thousands of years, you're never going to realize it because it doesn't exist. It's just imaginary. But there is such a thing as imagining the real. Because sometimes we say, oh, I just close my eyes and I just see darkness. Now what do? Well, what I do is then I have to imagine Ramakrishna there. And in order to imagine, I have to take help. I need help. And a picture, a photograph, and it can be help. Whatever I have read about him can help me imagine, he said. Now that imagination will become real only if it is really real. And so imagining the real will ultimately give me the perception of that real. So when we are imagining Ramakrishna in the heart, know that he is there. I'm not able to see him, that is why I'm imagining him. Now that process of imagination is really a form of thinking. Now thinking itself is different from meditation. Meditation, really speaking, is seeing. Meditation is not thinking. Swami Vivekananda said in one place, he said, don't seek God, see him. Which seems to be a very, well, think about it this way. We say God is everywhere. The problem is we don't see God anywhere. How come someone who is everywhere can't be seen anywhere? And so that is why the idea is, well, if I can't see him anywhere, at least let me try to see him in one place. If I can see him in one place, the hope is I might then be able to see him in 2 places, then 3 places, and gradually everywhere. And the best place to see him is the heart. And so we close our eyes, and we oftentimes, most of us, just see darkness. Then the next best thing we can do, well, what do you do if you can't see him, is start thinking about him, because thinking is what stimulates the imagination process. And when that thinking becomes one-pointed, that thinking becomes intense, at some point that thinking stops and seeing begins. Now, when exactly that would happen, how exactly that would happen, nobody can say. The best example to that is the process of sleeping. What do? None of us can will ourselves into sleeping. All that we can do is create the right conditions for sleep to come. And most of us, the right condition is usually a comfortable bed, switch off all the lights, make sure that there is no sound, and then just wait. What else can you do? Nothing else you can do. And then a lot of times then people will be just turning and twisting in their bed, and at some point sleep comes. Nobody so far has yet been able to know that, be aware of that exact moment they passed from that waking world to that sleeping world. But it happens. So just as that transformation occurs from waking to the sleep, we know it happens, we don't know when it happens, we don't exactly even know how it happens, but it happens. Exactly the same way, a person who is trying to meditate, all that this person has to do is think intensely of the Ishta and of nothing else. And what helps in that kind of thinking is a visualization. And in order to visualize, we need ideas, we need some material aid. A photograph of Murti can help. A form is helpful. Another aid for visualization is, which can prevent me from my mind getting distracted, is the right kind of sound, which is really what the mantra is. Mantra is a prayer. And it's not just kind of a randomly picked phrase somewhere. It's a phrase that is filled with power. The bija mantra, the bija, is a mystic syllable which yogis have seen in their high samadhi states, the word which carry tremendous power. The inner power of a divine form is embedded into that bija. And so the mantra is a very, very powerful sound. And people find difficult to concentrate because throughout the day we are hearing so many sounds, so much conversation, music and all random sounds, that when we sit for meditation, there is a big archive of sounds we already have, which interferes with the sound of the mantra, and that's how we get distracted. And it's not just the sound. We see so many forms. We see people, we see objects, we see things, there are memories. And so the divine form has to compete with all these other millions of forms. This divine sound of the mantra has to compete with all these other worldly sounds. And the struggle is therefore, can I tell myself for the next few minutes, I want to keep all these other sounds away. I want to keep all these other forms away. That I'm going to keep myself engaged in only the form of my Ishta and the sound of the mantra of my Ishta. Now this needs tremendous willpower, tremendous determination, needs faith, needs devotion, needs a tenacity of purpose. And this is thinking, this is a mental activity. But when we do it in a single-minded way, at some point, this thinking will automatically stop. You will never know when that thinking stops and seeing begins. And when you then see Ramakrishna, that will not be the picture, that will not be an image, that will be the real Ramakrishna of the heart. That will be the Ramakrishna of the now. It is that Ramakrishna who has the power to free me. It is that Ramakrishna who will free me from this samsara, give me everything that I seek. And so that is the journey we are called upon to make. The Ramakrishna of the books to seeing his living presence in and around us, in the society, in the people who are trying to live according to his teachings, and then bringing him still closer to the heart, and then seeing that living, real Ramakrishna. So those of us, much of what I have said today is not applicable only to Ramakrishna, it's applicable to all of these great ones who are the objects of worship of any tradition. It could be Jesus, it could be Prophet Muhammad, it could be the prophets of the Jewish tradition, it was the Buddha, it could be Krishna, Rama, it could be these deities, Shiva, Vishnu, it could be Venkateshwara, it could be the Devi. Divine manifests in infinite number of forms, in an infinite number of ways. So we respect and bow down to all those forms, although every one of us will have our own form. So we should not become like, you know the story of the Ghantakarna, right? How many of you know it? Okay, yeah, so it's simple. It's not. So there is this story about a person who was a great fanatic. So he was, let's say, a fanatic devotee of Shiva, let's say. And so he could not bear to hear the name of any other deity other than Shiva. And so people, when they came to know, they used to tease him. So when he sees any other deity's picture or form, he would not even look at it. Then if somebody mentions any other deity or chants some other deity's name, he just close his ears. Then people started to tease him, as we find some people who have such peculiarities, then of course people around will make fun. So people then started purposely in his presence taking the names of other deities, and finally he thought, instead of having to close his eyes, then he tied two bells here. Whenever other names are done, he'll just move his head. Tan, 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 tan. So, Ghanta Karna, he'll say. So, in the ears, he put bells. Now, Shiva himself was extremely worried looking at this great devotee of his. That Shiva appreciated the devotion, but Shiva did, like any form of the deity, they didn't like this fanaticism. To teach him, therefore, that all the gods, God is only one. All the forms may be many. So once when he was doing worship of Shiva, Shiva then manifested to him in the form of half Shiva and half Vishnu. Just to make him realize that one who you are worshipping is also, Vishnu is also included. But such was his fanaticism that he was using this incense. So he wanted that fragrance of that incense to go only into Shiva's nostril. So he closed the nostril of Vishnu in that thing. Now this is only a story to show that fanaticism can go to weird lengths. So while we may have our own Ishta, respect. That is what Sri Ramakrishna taught. So if Ramakrishna has to become real in our lives, we must not be fanatics. So all of what I said today is true for all forms of the divine. That they have a historical dimension, they have a living dimension, but when they have to become, to come and enter into our heart, only then we'll be able to touch, so to speak, the core reality of their being. So this is some of the ideas that I felt I could share with you today, speaking about Ramakrishna, past and present. So we have a few minutes. If you have any thoughts or ideas or questions, you can feel free to ask. Let's first have questions that are related to today's topic, and then we'll have some. Okay, so then
the question
is on.
The question that dwells in my mind all the time is that, as you said, the form helps you to bring it closer, the divine that you are praying. And finally the goal is to realize you put it in your heart, or place it in your heart space. But then why it's still constantly, sometimes it becomes abstract, but sometimes it still remains in the image form in my heart. So
Next one, say that again.
The form that I bring in my heart, sometimes it becomes, there is no image, but there is just the presence of that deity. But sometimes the image is necessary to feel the presence. So it's so confusing, and that's what constantly is my.
Yeah, I mean, there is no rigid, very tight rule about this. The most important thing is that whoever is the object of your worship must become real to you. The form is not absolutely essential, but the reality of your object of worship is. If that reality can be experienced by you without the form, that's fine. In fact, there are sects which only do nama upasana. They just repeat the mantra. They don't visualize anything. And then there are others who only do visualization, don't do this. Again, people are different. One method may work for one, another will be work for others. So the important thing is that God is real, and that reality must show itself in our life. And how do I know that what I feel real is really real? How do I know that I'm not just imagining it? And I think as they say, isn't it? You say proof of the pudding is in the eating. So if what I'm seeing is real, then it will change me. It will transform me. So if someone says, "Oh, I've been meditating for 30 years and I've had this great realization," and neither that person nor people around him find this person has changed at all, then probably it's not real. Because every spiritual experience, if it's a genuine experience, it will change us in some way. It may not be a change that is very visible at once. It could be a very tiny incremental change. But if it's a genuine experience, it will change us. And at least, if not others, the person will know inside that something has really changed.
Maharaj, this is more of a private nature. So if you don't want to answer in publicly and want a one-on-one, I can do that.
So you can ask in publicly, I can answer in publicly.
So the reason is, I always, after all these years of so-called practice, Sri Ramakrishna says, Hridaya Dongamarajaya. That means heart is a great place to imagine. And in several meditational methods, the one that Hari teaches and through Swami Vanishananda's practice, and I have read in places, you imagine there is this chamber in your heart which is beautiful and light, and imagine, in my case, Sri Ramakrishna or someone sitting there. He is looking out. That means, and then I have to detach myself from my physical body to go out there and to imagine him in my heart. That's what I understand. It may or may not be true. That is what they want. I have heard methods of, at least one Swami told me that sometimes it's so difficult, you can imagine that he is in your chamber on the first floor, and from the second floor balcony you are looking at him. All kinds of things. I find it extremely hard, even today, actually almost as hard as the first day, to go out and project me. And so what am I doing wrong, or that is not compatible with me?
No, it's not. It's admittedly, it is more difficult than imagining you are sitting facing Ramakrishna.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something it's easy to imagine, because that's what we are always doing. We go to a mandir, the deity is facing you, you are facing the deity. So it's easier to visualize that. And that can be helpful. It's not that that is absolutely wrong. But if the seeing the deity facing you always keeps you separate from the deity. And even if the deity is in the heart but still facing you, it's still separate from you. So yes, it is a little bit more difficult to see the deity as facing in the same direction as you. But it can be done. In some cases it might take a little bit more time than in some other cases. But it's easier to do it. It's, in a sense, you're not like actually coming out of yourself. It's not out of body existence or something like that. It's a kind of a metaphorical way of loosening, a little bit of a loosening of the ego. Right now my sense of I is so much connected with this body that it's even difficult to even imagine kind of coming out of the body at sea. And so, in fact, a couple of years ago, I had gone to Mayavati. Some of you may have gone there. And Mayavati is a center that Swami Vivekananda started. It's in the Himalayas. And so they have a new guest house there now. It's very well built. It's a very big one. And there is a Mayavati, yeah. The place, not the politician.
Yeah, that's what. Why would?
So that prayer space, they have a nice Om. In fact, if some of you have seen the live stream that we do in Boston now, presently we have a transparent Om, and that is actually the exact replica of the Om that we have in Mayavati. In fact, I saw it there, I liked it so much, so I got a replica made and then got it shipped to Boston. So anyway, so that Om, there is nothing in that prayer Om. It's Advaita Ashrama, so there are no images or anything. There is just this Om. And so there were a group of devotees there, and so we were sitting in that. And so we tried a different kind of meditation, if you like. And that is, when you're sitting facing Om, we have the idea, well, I'm sitting here and I'm now seeing that Om in front of me. And what I suggested was, for the next few minutes, we all can sit And then rather than us sitting here and seeing the Om, mentally, I can go there. Mentally, I'm still sitting here. Mentally, I go where the Om is and see myself. So rather than me seeing Om, I go inside that Om and see if Om were seeing me, what would Om see? So that's one of the things you could do. So if you are used to seeing Ramakrishna sitting in front and the devotee sitting here, then the devotee can say, let me try to go inside Ramakrishna and see if Ramakrishna were to see, what would Ramakrishna see? So again, and there is no just one way of doing it, but I think it is very helpful. So don't be disheartened if you don't succeed in doing so, but it's not impossible.
Maharaj, as a follow-up, sometimes it is possible to imagine not necessarily me going out and staring at him, but the following is easier. You can imagine him inside you, looking outside, etc., and you are walking, etc. Even there, that extra body thing will not happen. At least you can see that, which means that whatever I am doing is part of it. Therefore, for example, I cannot have many bad thoughts because he is now part of me and so on. That is an intermediate which, at the most, that is my high school. I not have reached there for that PhD.
And also sometimes one may not have to see the entire form of the Ishta. Sometimes there have been cases when people have said, oh, I've tried to visualize my Ishta and I'm able to see the eyes or the feet, which is fine. So if we find that seeing the whole form is difficult, I can just kind of open myself to that possibility that through His grace, some part might become visible. I think even if we don't succeed, we just kind of keep on praying, and then He Himself will make it possible. That's my strong belief.
And please bless us.
Well, that will come directly.
I know, but you just make a call there if you can. I've done that.
So, Maharaj, one other question is, you just mentioned about how do we know if the real is real? Mm-hmm. Can you just explain a little bit more in detail that we imagine something, for instance, Sri Ramakrishna, we start to think it's real, but then again question is real?
Yeah, that's why I said the validity can be seen from the effect it has on us. Because if we think like, oh, I've had this great experience and nothing has changed, I'm still the same old person, then probably it's better not to give too much importance to that. I mean, sometimes people have seen Ramakrishna, Mother, or any of these some divine images in their dreams. And then the question is, well, how wonderful is it, or what is it? What does it mean to see her? Now, seeing these things in the dream is good, because it just shows that those samskaras are there, those impressions are there, otherwise I wouldn't have seen them. But just because I've seen these things in dream should not be immediately bring us to the conclusion, oh, this is very profound spiritual experience. Because a lot of times people have seen a lot of things, but nothing has changed in their lives. So other than a little bit of encouragement that there are these good samskaras in my heart, which are manifesting in the form of these images in the heart, that is a positive side. But not everything that we see in dream should be mistaken for a great spiritual experience. Which is not to say that spiritual experience cannot occur in dream. There are definitely very spiritual dreams. There are people who have received their mantra in dreams. We read in the life of Mother, and that in sometimes people saw Holy Mother go and give mantra to them in their dream, and that the Mother was still there And so they went afterwards and met mother and told that you came in my dream and gave mantra, and then when mother gave the mantra, it was exactly the same mantra that was given in the dream. So there are genuinely spiritual dreams. But again, the same question, how do I know whether this dream is a genuine spiritual dream or just kind of an ordinary spiritual dream? Because there are at least 3 or 4 kinds of dreams. One dream is like kind of most common dream that we have, which is really a rehashing of everything that we have experienced in the waking world, comes again in the dream. Sometimes not in the same order. Sometimes, it's like let's say you are reading a novel, and the novel, as the book has become so old, all the pages have come apart. So when you're reading it, and then you're in a chronological way, that is in the waking life. Then suppose only it's a random page number 50 and 80 and 200, and you kind of read it, it won't make sense in the waking world. It makes perfect sense in the dream world. So in dream, stories are like that. Some experience on the office, some in the family, some with friends, all kinds of different connections get made, which makes sense in dream. When you wake up, you think, oh, what a bizarre dream I had. So those are the most common forms of dream. But there are also prophetic dreams. Some people have had, they have seen things that are going to happen next day or next week or next month. So those are called prophetic dreams. And some dreams are really genuinely spiritual dreams. That is something really profound happen. And again, the only way to know is to know whether it has really changed me somehow. Yeah, that's the only way to verify it is to see whether it has changed me. Other than that, it doesn't mean much. Yeah.
Just to add to this, when you're saying,
You have to hold this way.
when you mentioned that the proof of that experience itself is that it changes me, it means that in the end it is the daily, for an ordinary person, it is a daily karma. The karma piece, which, whatever the way you look at your deity, let's say you talk about Swami Vivekananda, the principles of his when he was living and the way he was working, you work on the same principles. That's where...
No. It's not about karma. It's about your understanding of yourself and understanding of the world around you. Now that might affect the way you do, but
how would it change you unless and until you actually manifest it in your daily life?
No. How you manifest it in a daily life, that change others can notice. But I don't have to do things differently in order for me to know I have changed. See, our own, like for instance now, if you are happy, you know your happiness. You don't have to smile and look in the mirror. Oh, I'm smiling, so I must be happy. Now, by your smile, others might know you are happy. But your own happiness, you don't need any action to know your experience of happiness.
Okay.
So knowledge and that inner transformation is like that. It's a matter of direct experience. You don't need to do anything to know it. But others might need to see you do it for them to know you have changed.
I need to still think of.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You have to ask your other question in a moment.
Yeah. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and then I have another
Okay.
question.
Please forgive me if I find if it's like too naive or too silly. But like there are a lot of books and things like that I come across. So one question is, so if ordainer has ordained the whole world in order and what's going to happen, you think there is a precise order of what's going to happen in this world, or it has a randomness, there is element of randomness in this world?
Randomness. I believe in randomness. I mean, when you said ordainer, what do you mean by that ordainer?
Like, this, like, whatever has, like people say that whatever has to happen will happen. So that means must have been preconceived at some point in time.
Not necessarily. Why should it be preconceived? Whatever is to happen will happen. Why should it be preconceived? There's no cause and effect relationship. If whatever is to happen, in order for that, it doesn't have to be preconceived.
So let me rephrase my question. So what I'm saying is this whole universe, the way it works, is it a pre-written movie script or it gets written on fly?
Actually, if you want the real answer, there is no universe.
Yes.
You see. Now the problem is, I'm seeing it. And therefore, I have to make sense of it. But it might make sense now, but when it's a little like what I said before. In the dream, everything makes sense. Everything appears very logical. It follows all the laws of the dream world. When we wake up, not always, but many times dreams appear very bizarre. It just doesn't follow the laws of this world. Right? So therefore, in the dream, if you ask like, from where did this dream world come? And the correct answer is, it doesn't exist. But you are not going to believe it, because you know a dream to be dream only when you wake up. So that is how your question is, that in this universe, and I'm just saying it doesn't exist. See, even if inside our dream, if someone were to come and tell me this is a dream, you're not going to believe that person. But that person is telling the truth. You see? And so just as dreams are random, and yet the way our human mind is programmed, we want to see connection. Randomness frightens us. And so what we call laws is only some pattern, a sequence. And when we see a sequence, then we say, okay, this is the cause, this is the effect. We still don't know anything, we have simply formed a sequence. But the moment we find a cause and effect relationship, we somehow feel satisfied and say, okay, now I know. But for all we know, for instance, Swami Vivekananda said, the law of gravitation, for instance. Now, nobody was there, say, 50,000 years ago, 50 million years ago, to see whether apples still fell from the tree, or whether there was gravitation still. But we go with the assumption that nature is uniform. If anything had happened now, it must have happened 10,000 years ago, a million years ago. But none of us have seen it. We don't have proof for it. There is no evidence for it. It's just based on the assumption. For all we know, things might have been very different a million years ago. Things might be very different. But at least during the span that we human beings are capable of imagining, thinking, or recording, it just seems like, well, there is some pattern. And so it seems to be like an ordered thing. Which is why it cannot be preconceived, because preconceived implies a very rigid system of laws. Anyway, but I mean, again, what I'm saying is not necessarily a very definitive answer. This is from one point of view. On the other hand, it might be more satisfactory to say, yes, God created this world, God has a plan for your life. And God knows that plan, you don't know that plan. And I think that answer is equally good. If that is the answer that resonates with me and can help me transcend my limitations, that is the right answer for you. Once Swami Vivekananda was giving a talk in San Francisco, and he said something, and then one in the audience got up and says, Swami, this doesn't make any sense. And then Swamiji said, Madam, this was not meant for you. And then someone got up and said, but it makes complete sense to me. And then Swami said, well, it was meant for you. So one good thing about Vedanta is that Vedanta never is not obviously not fanatic. In Vedanta, there is only one answer to it. Vedanta says, well, there are this range of answers, and just pick that answer that suits you best, because in the ultimate analysis, neither the question is tenable nor the answer. So it's okay. It's a little bit like when a grandfather is telling a story to say grandchildren. So grandchildren are about to fall asleep, and then sometime you have to kind of tell them some stories, some fairy tales. And so you tell them a story. Here was this one big demon, and then he had blue eyes, and he had this blah blah blah. You give some description, and then the child listens to it and then goes to sleep. And then next day or a week later, he said, "Grandpa, tell me a story." And then you start telling a story. I said, no, tell me of that demon that came. And you have completely forgotten what kind of demon it was. It's like, so you
made it up.
And then, what do? But for that child, that's very real. And they're like, no, that was not. That demon had blue eyes, not bright eyes. And so you have to then understand at what level the child is and say, yeah, there is that demon. Oh, it had a blue eyes and so on. Recognizing that when that child grows up, it should hopefully outgrow the need for that demons by that time. That's how when we grow up, some of the things that made sense at one stage, they were helpful at that stage, so we don't need to say they are useless. They serve their purpose, and then we need better and better answers for that. Okay, so you wanted to ask a question? Okay, last question.
In that case, does anybody else?
No. I'm deciding who has to ask the question. You don't decide.
Maharaj, I was going to say, based on what he said, ask the question that how do I know my own difference? And you said about joy. This has happened in my personal life. And I just wanted to help him. We have this permanent traffic jam on I-376 going westward just before the Squirrel Hill Tunnel. It's terrible. It's just terrible. And the reason being, and I would used to call them stupid guys on the left lane and on the right lane are driving slowly in the tunnel because they are scared or whatever. There's nothing bothering them. The moment they come out, they drive very fast. So, and this is man-created. And I get frustrated and I got angry. And then one day Hari taught me, said that he says, what's the point of being angry? Will you make the traffic go faster? No. It's just you are causing your own. And for several years I could not do anything about it. I knew what Hari was saying. But these days with Kirsch, when I go there, and even if it is, I don't get panicked anymore. So I have at least on that small thing, I've improved. So that's a spiritual practice.
And I have read many times this. I have done what Dai is saying. I have done in my personal life. The same thing, that do you need to react? So my point of view when I was asking you is, again, this is still an action. I'm not reacting. It's still a karma. I may choose to react. I may choose not to react. It doesn't mean that I was talking about a physical action where somebody can see me. So even this attitude of mine, which has changed me because of my devotion, dedication, is still a kind of a choice I have made. And then
that's fine. My point was very different. My point was to know that I'm irritated.
Yes.
I don't need to do these things. That's what I was saying. Yeah. I mean, for others to know I'm irritated, there has to be some expression. Yeah. For me to know, I know this thing. That's So thank you for today.